Hello and welcome to this new ExpressXR tutorial. Today we are having a look at the new DataGatherer, ExpressXR's easy to use solution for extracting basically any data from your app, storing it to files or sending it to a remote server. This video is about a new version of the DataGatherer which was introduced in ExpressXR's 3.0 update. If you're still using the old version, I suggest you do an upgrade, as the new system and the surrounding helper functions are now way more versatile and robust. You'll see why in the course of this video, so stay tuned. A data gatherer can be added by right-clicking in the hierarchy and selecting ExpressXR and then Data Gatherer. As you see, this created a new game object with the Data Gatherer component attached to it. Its inspector is divided into multiple sections through which we will be going one by one, starting with the export category on top. Here you can determine how your data should be saved, either locally or via HTTP post requests, or of course both. For both options you can then enter an export path which should be to a file ending on CSV. The next checkbox below is for exporting a new file per playthrough. In this case, a timestamp will be added between the file itself and the file ending. The result will be files that look similar to this, so we have year, month, day, hour, minute and second relative to when the app started. The last two options are for defining the type of CSV to be used. One could either use the classical comma or semicolons, a format found in regions like Germany. We chose semicolons as default, as many toString methods contain commas, like the ones for vectors, as you can see on the screen right now. If you want to stick to commas, or you just come across values that contain your separator character, you'll need to escape the values by surrounding it by double quotes. While you could take care of that yourself, enabling default columns or having that enabled does exactly that automatically for you. So I would recommend you keep that enabled. Next, let's have a look on how to trigger an export of a new CSV line. You can of course do that during the fixed update or periodically by enabling the respective options. While exports during update are bound to your frame rate, the value periodic export time determines the frequency of periodic exports in seconds. So this will be exported every second. Expanding and adding a new entry to our input action triggers allows the export every time a specific input has been performed, for example a button press. Let's select one of the select input actions, that is in this case if you touch the grip or the grip button of your left hand controller. The data gatherer can of course be used with Unity's event system when exporting new values. As an example, we are going to use another one of ExpressXR's features, a button quiz, as you can see here. The quiz has an event that is triggered every time an answer is given. We now just need to connect the data gatherer with the event and then select the function of the data gatherer, export new CSV line down here. And this means every time we would answer by pressing one of these buttons, a new value will be exported. Now let's go back to our data gatherer and take a look on how to select the values to be exported. For timing information, you can choose to enable several options. First, a human readable timestamp in a format similar to the timestamp added when exporting a new file per playthrough. Then, a Unix timestamp, which is basically the same thing but expressed as a number. Next up, we have the default Unity time, which is basically how long the app is running, and delta time, which correlates with the frame rate of the app currently. The input action data bindings array can be used to directly export values of an input device defined by an input action. This is especially useful if you want to record the headset and controller positions. The name of the column will be automatically set to the name of the input action you add here. The most important array property here is the data bindings array, as it allows you to select almost any other value. After adding a new array entry, you can first specify your own export column name for this value. Below, you'll find a similar structure as when connecting functions to events. You can select a game object and then use the drop-down menu below to select the function or property you want to export. As an example, let's drag and drop our button quiz from up here to our target object down there. And now we see the list. This drop-down menu contains all the values we can export, ordered by components in our game object. These values, of course, must be publicly accessible and can be either primitive, so like integers, floats, booleans, and so on, or have a proper string representation like strings and transforms. In the case of functions, those obviously have to return a value and can either have no or only optional parameters. However, you can call functions where the first parameter is a character, optional or not, like you see here. In this case, the column separator that we configure for our DataGatherer will be passed. From this list, we're now gonna select button quiz and then use the get full CSV export values up here, and this will extract every value that we can gather from our quiz. As you can see, selecting this value replaces the header with a whole list of columns. That is because the quiz is able to automatically gather a bunch of values and packing them into a single value, so we only have to select one function and get multiple values. To reflect the fact that multiple columns are exported, and so that we don't have to enter a long header manually, the quiz uses a header replacement functionality, which you can add to your own exported values. As mentioned before, not all values can be exported natively and require a tiny bit of coding to make things work. So let's create a small script to highlight why and how to do that. So let's just remove the default functions. The first problem is that in C#, not all values are converted to strings in a meaningful way. As an example, arrays in C# do not return a string representation of the array's elements, but rather the type of the array, something like system.int32 array, something like that. To give you the control on how to export such complex values, you will need to provide your own representation. Luckily, we can use ExpressXR's CSV utility class in most cases to do that. So let's define a public function exportMyArray, which returns a string value, and define an array data containing a few elements. Then the only thing we need to do is return CSV utility.array2string and then pass data. Easy as that. Another issue might be that the value you want to export is not bound to a component like application.version. In this case, we only need to write a function that returns the value of this static property field like this. Save it and go back to Unity, let it compile again, and then let's add the script to this interactable object by simply dragging and dropping. And then back in our DataGatherer, add 2 more entries to our data bindings and drag the interactable as target object into each of them, selecting my data and then export my array. as the first one and enter, for example, my array as export column name. Let's do the same thing for my data and then get application version and just use version as export column name. And that is basically it. Now, of course, we want to check if the values we are exporting are valid and can be retrieved. To do that, we have a few options. The first one is to use the button down here to print the current values as well as the headers. Doing that will, as I said, print our header and our values. Another option would be to export while we are running the app in the editor. But before we do that, let's disable export during update, periodic export, just so we won't get flooded with values when exporting them. After we then hit play and wait a little bit, we should see that a third button appeared. This will actually export values to the file we manually configured instead of just printing them to the console. So let's just hit that. And since we have already configured a button quiz to export values every time an answer is given, let's also try that. We're going to select one of the buttons and then scroll up. And using the 3-dot menu up here, we can emit a pressed event which simulates a button press. After that, we can stop the editor. And if we have a look in our data folder, which was the path we created, we can see we have down here our DataGatherer values. And if we open that, we can see we have our header in the first line, which contains our timestamp, the Unix time, Unity time, Delta time, and then loads of options from our button quiz. And back here, we have our value for our array and our version. And then our input action we also exported. The second line was when we exported the values through our DataGatherer inspector. And as we didn't answer any questions prior to this, we don't have any values from our button quiz. That's why we only have empty values up here. And after answering a question, we can see we have loads of information about that. And in both cases, in the end, we have our values 1, 2, 3 and our application version and our input action. And let's check our application version by just going back to Unity, going to File, Build Settings, and then Player Settings. And here we have our application version set to 100, which was the value from our CSV file. When you finally build your app, you won't have this structure here, so there's the question how to access your data. For Windows or PC headsets, the data is stored in the app data local folder. To access it, press Windows and R and then enter %appdata% all in caps. Click OK, which will open the app data roaming folder. We now need to go back one entry to the app data folder, and here we find the local folder. Then find the folder named after your company you entered in the player settings. In this case, it is default company. And then the app name also from the player settings. And here you would find the data. When exporting to Android headsets, you'll find the data in storage emulated, then your user that is logged in for your Android account, then Android data, and then your package name, which can be found again in the player settings, but under the Android section. So let's just open that again, select Android and scroll down, open other settings. And here you'll find your package name, which basically consists of your company and your app name. You usually have to connect your headset to your PC and then access the files manually. To wrap things up, let's have a look on how to easily create your own multi-column values and add a header replacement, which we have seen in use with our button quiz. Let's open our script again and just copy export my array and rename it to my MultiColumn, while also adding a character as parameter called sep, which the DataGatherer automatically detect and replace with the export character, so we can use that to generate multiple columns. Let's also replace our function down here with a string.join, then our separator and our data array, which will return a simple string where each array element is separated with our separator character. As now our string contains the separator character, the DataGatherer will detect that and will escape our values. As we don't want that in that case, we can add an attribute similar to serialized field, but in this case it's called MultiColumn value. Even if that value contains a separator, do not escape that. And since we also don't want to add a header each time we select this value, let's add another attribute called HeaderReplacement, which takes a number of headers or a number of strings which will be used as headers. Let's just enter value 1, value 2, and value 3. And while we're at it, we can also add an information message by adding a header replacement notice attribute, which will take one string as parameter. This message will be printed every time a function is selected for a data gathering binding. This can be used to inform others about complex values of your functions, or in our case, for a shameless plug. Let's go back to Unity again, let it compile, and now replace our button quiz with our interactable, and there we'll select our my data, export my MultiColumn. As you see, we have our values replaced, and down here is our message. And if we would now change our separator to comma, we can see the values update also in our header. So that is it for the DataGatherer. If you're interested in it or want to check out ExpressXR, an easy to use toolkit for XR with Unity, make sure to check it out using the link down in the description below.